Awesome. So today, actually, my goal is to talk a little about artificial intelligence and the environment, right? I think two very relevant things in today's world in the conversations we're having. Hopefully, I'm able to show you guys how they're related and where the opportunities lie. So, brief introductions to myself. My name is Sidhant. I used to study at the University of Hong Kong as a researcher in artificial intelligence and robotics. I've worked so my specialty really is to be honest with marine robotics, right? I started a project that built the world's fastest robotic fish at HKU. So that's the bottom left picture that we then I've worked on all kinds of things. I've worked on braille keyboards. I've worked on coral reef mapping robots, actually with Caesar. If you know Caesar Harada, I worked with him on that. And most recently, I've worked on basically building underwater cameras for marine research, for fish farms, and also these automated electric boats, right, for trash collection. So today I'll be sharing a little more about my experiences. As you can see, they're very deeply tied into technology. They're very deeply tied into sustainability and the environment. So hopefully I'm able to give everyone a bit of an insight. So I want to start by defining in our sense what is sustainability. And I think especially when we work with a lot of corporates, you see the word sustainability being thrown around a lot, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of meaning or structure, right? So I think of it very simply, which is in the rush to create growth in our economies, we've basically built imbalanced systems with our environment, with our nature, right? And these systems are simply not sustainable, because sooner or later we are going to run out of resources. It's actually going to affect us, right? So even from a purely greedy perspective, sustainability is super important, right? We have to figure it out. And um, at my company, we basically believe that the balance between humanity and nature is broken, right? Over this decade, it's our sort of mission to actually restore this balance. And we believe that technology has the possibility to build this relationship, to create this relationship back with our planet, where we're able to keep things sustainable. So we'll tie it again to what Benita talked about earlier, the sustainable development goals, right? So basically the UN has come in and said, hey, look, we're trying to get to these goals by 2030. We've divided them down pretty well. um, and if we are all able to work on these problems, and really every company, every individual stays true to solving these key issues, then we actually might have a much more sustainable world on our hands, right? So the real question that I'm trying to answer today is, how can AI or robotics help us create this kind of world, this kind of super sustainable world, right? So let's start with the problem. So when we look at environmental issues, and I think this will be shared across the room, is you see two big challenges. The first is a lack of understanding, right? Even today, our actual in-depth understanding of most environmental issues is very surface level. I mean, just for example, we work with plastic waste, and one of the most common figures thrown around is that there's 8,000 million tons of plastic waste in the water every year, right, entering through rivers and into our oceans. Actually, if you look at the study that came up with that figure, they basically measured three rivers globally for about 4 days, and then basically extrapolated what every other river in the world should be. So the actual understanding we have of most of our climate issues, most of our sustainability issues, is really low. It's very surface level. And the second is that we have a lack of resources committed to this. We exist in a capitalist society that does not a certain value towards basically sustainability goals, right? And so that's changing more and more with ESG, and there is some sort of transition, but it's, for the most part, most people are not putting resources into creating sustainability. So we see these two big issues with most environmental problems. And if you look at what AI does, or what artificial intelligence does, AI is basically great at doing two things. One is processing tons of data, right? So as human beings, we're not actually very good at processing tons of data. Well, artificial intelligence systems can do that really well, right? Machine learning systems can do that really well. And the second is that AI can replace humans in very simple, very low intelligence tasks, right? And why that's important, why these two things are super important, is because actually, if you look at this, processing data can help us build more understanding, right? Which is the initial problem we have. So we have a lack of understanding. If we can process a lot of data, then we can build more understanding about these environmental issues. And at the second layer, we have a lack of resources. So even though there's awareness, even though there's potentially even funding and money available today, capital available to make things happen, there's actual limitations, constraints on the ground in terms of resources we can deploy. But with AI, we can start replacing human beings and actually providing more artificial resources to these environmental issues, right? And so that is where we see the value of artificial intelligence coming into the future. So I'm going to quickly today just attempt to cover two of the use cases we started with at our company, kind of talk through our approach of how we found these problems and how we are actually applying AI to create more value. So as you can see from my sort of profile, I was obviously very passionate about the ocean, passionate about creating sustainability in the water ecosystem. And so we started with SDG 14, right? Life below water. We started actually, our story starts off in about 2019, roughly 3 years back, where me and my co-founder actually went to the Philippines, and we were working with a National Geographic research group. And they said that, one of the biggest issues we have is we're trying to understand more about how the fish are moving, more about how the ecosystems are changing because of global warming, but we don't have enough data. And why do we not have enough data is because we don't have the tools to collect that data. So these guys were actually going out to sea about 5 kilometers and then diving every single day to take photos and videos and collect data for their research. Right. And actually, all over the world, this is how research is done. And I'll tell you the craziest part, they collect 5 gigabytes of data, they come back and then they process it by hand, by eye, right? So they're saying they count the number of fish literally on a computer screen, right? So we basically said, okay, this is crazy. If we want to create more data for the oceans, we want to create more understanding, this cannot be how we go forward, right? And so we started creating an underwater camera for them that could basically last more than a week. So they don't have to keep diving. And what this does is not only reduce their cost, which means they can do more research for the same amount of grant funding, right? But it also increases the amount of data that can be analyzed at the same time. So they're not, with AI, they're not having to analyze this data slide by slide or picture by picture. The AI can basically go through it and count the fish and generate insights. And so we started this use case about 3 years back, where we're doing long-term deployments for marine research. And so before, our clients are trying to, let's say, work on understanding how many fish are at a manta, feeding site, it's super costly. It requires a lot of people. But now with our system, they basically put a camera there, and then the camera looks at all the fish for like a whole week. They take it out, they plug it into our computer. In fact, we use AWS. So for Perkins, that's we use pretty much your system. We put it up there on the cloud, it processes, and our scientists get all the data they need. All right. So we're able to not only cut the cost, but we're able to create more understanding, and we're able to artificially kind of create some resources for them. Right. Now, what's interesting is we did this, and then the government of Hong Kong came to us and said, hey, we have a problem. So it's really great you're doing this for marine research, but actually we're trying to prevent illegal humphead wrasse imports, right, in Hong Kong. And they basically said, okay, it's very difficult to monitor these illegally imported fish, right? So we basically actually helped them build an app in partnership with HKU, to literally go up to fish tanks in Sai Kung. Their officers can take pictures of the fish, and it compares them to the government database, right? So what I love about this is we took an application that wasn't, so it was originally intended for marine research, but because we've created more resources, we now have the government coming in and saying, hey, I can actually not only create more data, but I can also monitor illegal fishing, right, through the same sort of system. And then actually it started going a step further. So I was talking to Benita earlier about this, right? So we basically came across more and more demand from fish farms. And what we realized is that globally, over the last century, we've overfished. Human beings have overfished like crazy, right? We have really depleted the stock of fish in the oceans. We've created huge ecosystem imbalances. The net result of this is our demand for fish is still going up, but actually the supply is going down. And so what's happening is more and more we are creating fish farms to keep up with this demand. Now, fish farms, not great, but are significantly better for the environment than actually fishing from the oceans, because the natural ecosystems are really not affected by and large, right? So they're affected in the areas where these farms are, but then the effect does not actually spread out. And so we started saying, okay, can we create more efficient fish farms in Asia? If we can do this, we actually prevent overfishing in these communities. These communities can farm their fish and create more value and be competitive in the international market. So we started again working with the government of Hong Kong to create live fish farm monitoring. And again, you'll see it's the same product. It's the same camera. It's the same kind of AI. right? We're not really doing a lot more, but we're able to help these fish farms stay competitive, right? We're able to help these fish farms figure out, okay, how much is their feed, create more efficiency, create less pollution, while they're able to grow even more fish in the same amount of land, right? And the net result of all of this is that we're creating less fish taken out from the ocean, right? And we're able to create healthier, better fish in the local ecosystem, right? And so what we saw is actually a very interesting transition over 3 years. We came up with this idea to say, okay, we want to help marine researchers, we want to create more data. But by creating more data, by creating more resources, we have not only helped the original target group, but we've actually started looking into food security. We started looking into innovation. We've, by preventing overfishing, you're actually cutting carbon emissions directly from these fishing boats. And we're creating economic growth for the communities where these fish stocks were dying, right? Or these fish stocks were reducing. So we see that actually these SDG goals are very closely tied because our community, our society is so closely tied. And so if you use, if I mean, we can use artificial intelligence to create efficiencies that not only affect, things like life below water, but actually affect a lot of the other SDGs when you actually go out to field and start implementing. So actually, I'm gonna before I and so yeah, basically you can see that in this way we've created more understanding and we've created more resources artificially, with using a bit of AI and a bit of technology. So before I go ahead, I just wanna let's have a little bit of banter in everyone who's in the room. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Are you guys curious about something? You want to recover something?
So what's the biggest challenge of using your product for the researcher or the fish farm? What is the is it what people find challenging with AI?
So to be honest, actually, the biggest issue with AI is there's a people are not able to understand what it can do and what it can't do. Right? This is a very basic kind of issue because what we do is we basically go up to them and say, hey, okay, we're able to reduce your feed cost, we're able to increase your output, your fish will be healthier, there'll be fewer diseases, right? And that's because the AI is able to observe these fish and make some very basic inferences from the data, right? So where we see the challenge is first is in the user adoption side. Very often the industries are quite traditional, right? And they're not willing to adopt this kind of newer resources, even if it's helpful to them. They basically they're just not interested. And it's not a matter of, right? So that's the first layer of challenge we see. And the second is actually on the user understanding, which is these AI systems are at the end of the day quite recent technology. They are quite complex to use, right? So from our side, the effort has been how do we simplify it so much that even the first time someone uses this kind of AI tech, they're able to get useful insights from it without having to really do a lot of fiddling around or a lot of work. So I think accessibility in that sense is the real challenge with artificial intelligence for most environmental issues. I mean, even when we work with NGOs, to be honest, most of them have no experience working with technology. So being able to access that technology, maintain it, keep it being reliable it's super important.
So you said you have been working with the Marine Center for your product. How about the NGO like WWF, Conservation International? Do they use that to monitor the fish health?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, not. We almost did a deal with WWF Hong Kong. Currently, we're working with WWF in Malaysia. But basically, we work with a number of NGOs all over the world. So, especially for marine research, we work with about 30 or 40 NGOs in all the different continents: Africa, Australia, the US, Canada, Asia as well. So all over the world, basically, they're non-governmental groups that are they're using our camera to generate data, right, about their local region. And what we see is that this is actually a win-win relationship because eventually, if you look at, I mean, this is almost a bit crude view of it, but eventually, if you look at the funders of this kind of work, right, the funders of the NGOs, they care a lot about the data. They care a lot about the storytelling, the insights that they're able to generate from their funding. So What our tool actually does is a kind of dual win. So one is for the actual scientists, there is really a more clear understanding of what's going on in the environment, and therefore what is the way forward. But also it helps them from a capital raising standpoint, right? Which is, if they're able to create more data with the same amount of funding, that makes them more competitive, or that makes them likely to get more funding in the future. And it actually makes it easier for them to keep growing and creating more value. So we work with different NGOs, not too many in Hong Kong, but a lot of them outside, especially in Southeast Asia, Australia, and Africa.
And the basic design is the same, right? Basic design of the camera. You just
Yeah,
find different optimization for the different purposes, right?
correct. So, I mean, if you see this as just a tube, it's a tube about that big, right? If this was from 3 years ago, this is from about a year ago. It's still the tube. It's just put in a cage. These are the photographs. So that's the tube again, right? So it's basically the same design. I mean, and even the AI system, to be honest. So even over here, if you see somebody's lowering that camera with their hand sort of into the water, so the basic system remains the same. And I kind of like to think about it as a free human to work for you, right? So basically it's like a software system that's just working for you, that's doing all this very it's not very difficult work. A human being can do this work quite easily, but it's a lot for a human being to do. So there's a lot of time and money spent, right? And so you can really reduce that time and money spent. You can really create a lot of efficiency, really make research fast and easy, right? And for us, the view is that if we are able to make not only research but like fish farming, a lot of these more sustainable practices fast and easy with AI, then it's going to accelerate the growth of sustainability becoming the new reality.
Mm. And what's the
It's,
cost? Oh, sorry.
sorry, cost is a good question.
What's the cost of saying running one of this in a month? Like if I'm the fish farm in Hong Kong, if I do this, how much do I need to pay?
Sure. So actually, the electricity is free. It's solar powered, and the internet cost is about 80 to 90 HKD a month to pay for the online, for the streaming to the dashboard, and then we typically charge about 200 Hong Kong dollars a month for the AI to run as a service, right? So it's not super expensive, and actually, if you look at the benefit we bring them in terms of the size of the fish, in terms of the feeding, the reduction in feeding costs, the early detection of diseases, the net benefit is a lot more, right? For them. So our idea is that actually it's like having a full-time person on your fish farm or in your marine research center to do some kind of work, some very basic work, but that really saves you a lot of time and money over the year. And so that's how we're trying to create some efficiency here.
Perkins, you have a question, Perkins?
Yeah, I actually have two questions. One is, so you're actually working with a lot of NGOs around the world, but I see that you actually have to localize the use cases. I believe most of the time, right? So how do you like support so many different projects around the world? This is the first question. And then the second question is, you just mentioned that the cost to say the fish farmers are actually not that high. So how do you keep keep this species sustainable for yourself?
Sure, that's a great question. So, I mean, what we've learned is, okay, let's put it this way. When we work with local clients, we offer a lot of customization, right? And so the idea is that the local Hong Kong is a great place, by the way. Sorry, a bit of a diversion, but the reason is Hong Kong has a lot of variety of water. Hong Kong has a lot of variety of use cases, and Hong Kong has the capital and technology available to try different things. So we really love experimenting in the local environment. So when we work with local clients, whether it's the government or private clients or NGOs, we offer a lot of flexibility. When we ship outside Hong Kong, we don't offer a lot of flexibilities. We sell a very standard product, right? And that's how we're able to run multiple locations all over the world without really, having a lot of stress. So locally, we're able to do a lot. Internationally, we sell a very standard refined product. And that balance allows us to do multiple locations. And, at the end of the day, if the system is online, it's just processing on the cloud. It doesn't matter where it is, so from our side, it's maintainable anywhere in the world. And sorry, the second question was,
I mean, the cost to your client is actually quite low. So how do you keep your business sustainable?
So actually, well, yes, I appreciate your thinking as well. That's very nice. The entire idea is that for us, we actually make a pretty decent margin. To be honest with you, we make a 70% margin on the software part of the product, right? Now, I have a belief, and this kind of percolates through our company as well, which is that we don't make profit without impact, and we don't make impact without profit. It's very simple, two-sided relationship, right? And we learned this very early on, because what we've seen is, if you make impact without profit, very often you're solving problems either not the right way, or you're not solving the right problem, right? Because if it's really valuable, then people will actually pay for it for the most part.
Right.
And then it works the other way around as well. So if you're creating profit without impact, then you actually have an unsustainable business. They're very simply put, right? So it has to be two-sided. They have to be linked to each other. So for us, it's a simple matter of, okay, if you look at, for example, fish farms or marine research labs, right? I mean, we are talking of not one camera or two cameras or 10 cameras. I mean, we're talking of 1,000, 10,000, for fish farms, even 100,000 or a million farms,
Oh, okay.
right? So when you scale it up, that 200 or $300 a month is actually a lot of money, right? And it's certainly very big and very profitable. So it's very often not about trying to squeeze the most out of each individual player. But the beauty with sustainability issues is they're so big, right? These environmental issues are so cross country, so across geography as well. The scale is so big that if you're able to create basic good unit economics, you can really scale it up, and you don't need to worry about profit. I mean, you'll be able to figure that out.
Actually, I have a question. Because you actually mentioned that one of the challenges of your work is that because of the fisheries industry in Hong Kong is actually rather traditional generally. So how do you plan to overcome this barrier? Is it really a challenge? I can understand that. Yeah. Thank you.
That's a great point. I mean, it honestly, it was not easy initially, but I think there's two or three very important factors, right? Number one, to be honest with you, in Hong Kong, the fisheries industry is dying, right? It's really becoming less and less every year, and so slowly people are realizing, especially the new people who are coming in, is that you have to adapt. You have to use technology. You have to adapt. That is the only way you're going to stay relevant, right? The second is creating the right narrative. Now, in most of these very traditional industries, the problem is not that they don't want to adopt technology. The problem is that they basically don't trust you, and their existing system works. So there's no reason for them to trust you, right?
Right.
So what we're doing is working. For example, we work with the AFCD, the Fisheries Department, right? And then we work with the local. Actually, there's some politicians who are also very well connected in the fisheries. Or we work with some local influencers who are in the fish industry. They're very well-known people, right? Very reputable people. So we basically build credibility through the existing infrastructure, through the existing establishment. And what we've seen is, when you build credibility with people who these guys already trust, then they're more open to actually adopting a solution, right? So if you go up to them directly, probably they're just like, we're not interested, who wants this, we're doing fine. But when the government tells them, hey, you need to do this, otherwise you're not going to exist in 5-10 years, and then suddenly, okay, they're like, okay, the government's telling us this, technology is important. So it's very often about changing the narrative by working with the right stakeholders, and that's kind of been our process.
Right. Do you actually offer any samples for them, like a test, like a stage of testing, so they have an experience, like a feel for what it's like before deciding whether they're going to really fully adopt it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, 100%. That is, so we actually give our first 6 months absolutely for free. We're like, use it, like it, hopefully love it. And if they don't like it, we actually just take it back. We say, okay, it's a loss for us, but it eventually it's about changing the mindset. And we've got enough projects where we don't have to worry about sort of giving things out for free. But yeah, very often that's exactly what we do to build trust early with these clients.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to quickly wrap up the second part of the presentation, which is more about Clearbot. And again, feel free to interrupt and just ask any questions as I'm going through the slides. So, right. So the second part of this presentation has to do with these two SDGs, right? So we basically started also about 3 years ago. There's a graduate group at HKU, which I was part of, and we started thinking, okay, plastic is a big problem, and it ties very closely to these SDGs around communities, sustainability, and consumption. So we realized a lot of that plastic was getting into the water. If you've lived in Hong Kong and you've gone to a beach, then you've definitely seen some floating waste. right? So it's one of the biggest issues we're facing. And so with this figure again, right, we've got about 8 million tons of waste that enters the oceans every year. We actually look at it as a global epidemic, right? It's an absolute challenge for us to solve. And about 3 years ago, we actually went to Bali, and that's how we found out a lot about how this ecosystem works. And what we learned is that the challenge isn't, well, at the core, the challenge is actually just consumption, right? I mean, if we reduce consumption, we consume more responsibility, a lot of this would not happen. But in terms of actually preventing it from getting worse, at least in the short term, the problem is that you have a lot of these places that are absolutely filled with waste in the water, but there's no good way to collect it out, right? We use in Indonesia, they're actually using paddle boats. They can't even use motorboats because the trash gets stuck in the propellers, because that's how dense, that's how much waste is there in the water. And in Hong Kong, if you've been around central Aberdeen, you've definitely seen one of these boats, these sampans. They put a net in the front and then they collect waste out using them. So government has about 70, MARDEP has about 70 of these boats around Hong Kong every day collecting waste. So we realized a few very interesting things. First of all, these boats actually collect very little waste. So there's a small little bag on the front, and that's actually all the waste that they collect. So you have this giant boat which is collecting less than 100 or 200 kgs a day. And then the second is these boats actually use gasoline. So they have 30, 40 horsepower engines to run. So they're burning fuel to run. And if you look at it from a carbon to carbon basis, they actually create more pollution than they're pulling out per day, right? So if you look at it, it's quite shocking, right? I mean, in places where it's really bad, there is just no solution. In places where it's less bad, like Hong Kong, there's just a bad solution. And so we kind of looked at this and said, hey, we have to do something about this, because the impact of this problem is massive, right? Both locally in the communities it affects and globally in terms of the big picture. Voila is Clearbot. So Clearbot is basically our invention where we are trying to create artificially intelligent electric boats. And we started in Bali 3 years ago, trying to understand the problem more with different communities in the region. And actually, if you look at this picture on the right, this is the first Clearbot we made. It was made with like aluminum and some nets and some local material in Bali, right? Just literally working with the community. We put it together. It used a drone. It was like a radio control sort of thing. And but eventually we started to understand, okay, if you look at the problem, there's issues of approachability, kind of what we talked about earlier, where users find AI very complex or very intimidating. There's issues around autonomy, which is, can we operate without human intervention to create additional resources, and around scalability, which is how much can we really clean, because the problem is really big. And so our kind of idea was, hey, we can have communities put together these boats, which are very cheap, very rugged. They can deploy it in their waters, they can collect waste autonomously, and we can come back and process that waste with a recycling center. And we actually worked with some local NGOs to get pictures of trash from the beaches of Hong Kong. So as people would do beach cleanups, they would literally take photographs of the trash in the water. They would send us these photographs, and we would use that to train the AI on Clearbot to become better and better at collecting waste from the water and bringing it out. And today, this is what our product looks like. We basically replace these old gasoline powered boats with these cleaner, greener machines. And the basic concept is that we are cutting huge amounts of carbon emissions while these boats are going out. So it's literally over a ton of CO2 per day across 70 boats that we would be cutting out. And most importantly, this is where the AI and environmental story comes in, is not only are we creating additional resource by removing manpower constraints, but we're adding transparency. And one of the biggest issues in waste collection especially is that there's no transparency in the system. Like, we don't actually know how much is being collected, where is it being collected from, what kind of waste is ending up in the water, what is the ratio, what is the material, how recyclable is it, how contaminated is it. So one of the big things that we're able to do is actually have, every time we go out to sea, we collect some waste, we actually have an exact number on how many bottles, cups, styrofoam pieces we collected. We know where it was collected. We know what time of day, how contaminated it was, what its approximate size and weight was. And why this is super important is, eventually, if we want to plug the leakage, if we actually want to identify where the waste is coming into the water in the first place, then we need to have data. We need to have insights and understanding. And that's where a lot of this machine learning stuff works very well for us, because it can automate that. It can find insights as these robots are going out and collecting this data in real time. Oh, okay. So we have, I don't know if that's a video, it looks like a photograph. But basically, actually, we have a conveyor belt on our robot, and these are like two pieces of trash that have been collected. And then the purple is like how our robot is identifying it. So you can see it's identified, one is a wrapper, one is a plastic bottle, and the plastic bottle cap separately, right? So basically, that's the kind of data that comes on our dashboard where you can actually find out what kind of materials have been collected, what the ratio looks like in different parts of the city. And that helps us understand where the waste is actually coming from. And over the last 2 years, we've actually expanded. So we're not just doing waste collection, which is still our by far our biggest business, but we're actually doing removal of oil. We're actually helping move cargo, emission-free cargo movement. We're doing inspections. And so the use cases have started to kind of grow, right? Because these cleaner, greener boats are really in demand. People don't want to use gasoline-powered machines, polluting machines anymore. And once again, what we see is that these SDGs are very, very closely tied. We started off aiming to really look at plastics and waste removal, and what we've ended up doing is working very much in carbon reduction, decarbonization of the ocean, building new innovation, and also engaging communities in very real world sort of applications of artificial intelligence and the environment. So once again, we see that AI has helped us basically build much more of an in-depth understanding. They're helping us understand what's in the water, where's it coming from. And with robotics, it's able to create more resources. So where before, if you had one person who could drive one boat to clean, one area in a day, you can now have one person running 5 or 10 boats, which are unmanned, right? Just need to be supervised, and then therefore cleaning up a lot more. And so that's again the idea that actually artificial intelligence and robotics helps create more understanding and more resources for us to tackle environmental issues. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of actually wrapping up as well my presentation. Of course, not for questions and comments, but just, but this is, I think, the big takeaway is that AI helps us cut costs, it helps us create efficiencies, and basically use lower energy to do the same work, which eventually means it's cheaper and it's usually better for the clients. AI can help us analyze a lot of data, and it can help us find insights, help us find understanding of things we didn't know, and it helps create transparency, right? It makes it much more difficult for us to have make believe on what's really happening in the environmental problems. And that I think is a super important step for us to go ahead. AI can help leverage manpower resources. So it can take the power of 5 people and just give one person that power. And I think that is very important going ahead. And finally, what we've learned in our journey is that these SDGs are tied, right? So, and that I think is a very generic thing. It's not just with AI, but really, if you're creating an impact, this impact is very, very scalable. It's scalable across multiple facets of socioeconomic issues, and really, impact can be created, across different kinds of value chains. So yeah, that is it. I'd love to hear any more questions, comments you guys have.
Yeah. Actually, I'm wondering, like, are there any interesting results from your analysis, from the AI analysis? Yeah, because you conduct a lot of like data analysis. So I'm wondering if there are any key takeaways from the analysis. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a few interesting things we've seen, right? Like, for example, okay, let's take Aberdeen Marina. So actually, we found that a lot of that waste, it's like these floating styrofoam boxes, and the wrapping equipment, and we found out it's coming from like the trash density is highest in a region, and that region is actually next to a waste transfer facility, which is in Aberdeen, by the way, right next to the fish market, right? And so what we were able to do is actually just run the boat up and down doing cleanups, but we were able to realize that in fact the waste might be coming from a particular source, or it might be concentrated around that area. The second kind of insights we've seen is actually the reality of how recyclable waste is. So to be honest, I'm being very, very transparent with you guys. Like, most of the waste we collect is not recyclable, right? And so when you actually quantify it, when you actually get this data out, what you're able to realize is how important is sorting. Right? You're able to realize how contaminated is the waste, because if it's too contaminated, the recyclers can't actually recycle it, right? You get a good idea of volumes, daily volumes, location-based volumes, and all of that's important because eventually the waste management industry actually works on very large numbers, right? And so for things to make sense for them, you need to be collecting enough uncontaminated waste of a particular material. Only then they're going to go ahead and recycle it. And so actually generating this data, this kind of insight, helps us understand not only where the waste is coming from, but really how much of it can be recycled, really how much of it can't, and what percent of this could be recycled but is not being able to because we don't have the right facilities, what percentage of this can be sent out somewhere else for recycling. And I think all of this is important because, looking forward, if you are the government, or even if you're an activist group and an NGO, and you want to figure out how to allocate your resources, right? Then it's really good to know, for example, what brands of water bottles are seen most common in the water, right? And if you're the government, you probably want to know what materials are having the highest collection but are not being recycled, and then they can invest in a recycling facility for those materials. So what we see is, in terms of insights, the data becomes really, really useful. And especially with ESG kind of going across industries now, we've seen a lot of interest in the data side of things, where companies really want to know how much is their real impact, how much are they really collecting, and how much of a difference they're making.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Benita, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. You said your system can identify the trash, but trash come in many forms. So have you done a check how accurate is those? Because sometimes that plastic maybe is from so weird. I don't know, from tampons or something. Like, how can you identify it?
That's a great question. Actually, to be honest with you, we have about 11 categories right now where we have high accuracy, right? And totally we have 40 categories, but the other 29 of them are not so accurate. So we don't officially declare them, right? So the most common items like bottles or cans or takeaway containers, plastic bags, these items we have very high accuracy because there's a lot of data. We have a lot of data to train on, so it actually works quite well. But the two places we face issues are, number one, categories where we don't have data. So for example, initially in COVID, masks was a category that we hadn't seen before, right? But now you see a lot of masks in the water. So it was a whole new use case, like a training category for us that came up later. And the second is when the waste is unrecognizable, right? So sometimes it's so broken down, especially near the beaches, right? We'll see waste, it's like just pellets. You can't really tell what kind of material it is. So at the moment, we just classify that as other, right? Or pellet, general, like sort of general category, and we let it be. But the idea is that, as we go more and more to the water, as in we have more and more data, that actually we are able to identify more and more materials, more and more kinds of objects.
Good. Thank you. I know it's a very difficult task, not easy. It's just new type of plastic every day.
No, 100%. And I think the data collection is still okay. I really see the challenge, to be honest with you, on the recycling side, right? So we work with some recycling partners to recycle whatever we can. But very often the issue is not the material can't be recycled, but it's impractical to recycle it. Because the transportation cost is too much, or because it's too contaminated, or we have to sort it, it's too expensive to sort. So they just give it to landfill. So I think that, in the long run, the systems on land also like have to improve proportionally to cater for creating a better ecosystem.
And can you, I know we were speaking on the school workshop. I know Perkins here is a parent, or maybe Anna is a parent as well. Can you tell us a little bit how school workshop work to educate the students about this?
Sure. So with schools, actually, we do a kind of mixture between STEM and AI for environment, right? So the first goal is really to help students understand some basics about actually what AI is and what the capability is. So that's part I haven't covered, at all really in today's presentation, but it's just to understand, okay, actually, how does AI work and how smart is it? Is it really AI? And you'll realize it's not really artificial intelligence. It's just kind of pattern recognition. And then the second part of this is to teach students about how AI, actually the goal is to teach them about how AI can be used for problem solving, right? And then we argue that the environmental issues are the most important issues in the world, right? They affect every single human being. So can we really use AI to create something interesting, to create something useful for society, right? And then typically we'll guide them into the concept of Clearbot, which is we'll say, okay, hey, let's look at the plastic in sea problem, in the ocean or in river problem, right? And can we come up with something to solve it? And then the second half of it, so then the students brainstorm, they come up with some ideas. We've seen some really interesting ideas as well from the kids, depending on their age. And then we actually get them to assemble a boat. So we have this Clearbot for education that we're making now, which is just a smaller version. It's not as big. And it's like it's kind of not like Lego, it's like mechanics, right? So like basically students, even small students, they can in a group, they can assemble up this boat. So they actually build this concept. They take pictures of the trash themselves, right? Of like bottles. And then they see how the AI is learning or how the AI is becoming better with more data, right? So they're able to kind of understand how actually having something in the real world brings so much value, right? Because that value that kind of can be scaled up. And then finally, the most interesting part of the day is usually going out and testing it, right? So we'll train it, for example, trash, and then we'll train it for a duck, right? And then they put a water bottle, and then the Clearbot collects the water bottle, and then we put like a floating duck, and then the Clearbot stops, and it's like, no, I will not. Will save the animal, right? So the idea is that to show them that how AI can actually do some very smart things and really solve some very real problems. And we wrap up by actually asking them to brainstorm not just marine trash cleaning, but really there's so many different issues, so many important issues around the environment, and we kind of help brainstorm around some cool ideas on how AI can help other things in the world, right? Other environmental issues in the world. And that's kind of how we wrap up. So really the goal is to make them more responsible citizens going into the future, right? Smarter, sort of more curious people. And we believe that that will lead to a better future.
And you have a workshop that usually allow people to visit for private visit, right? Before the COVID, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So we usually get them to come to Aberdeen and see the robot in action, actually collect waste, tinker around, play, fiddle with the robot. We even let the students drive it actually. So the idea is just to make it more engaging. We feel like because I mean, I understand COVID's a challenge, but to be honest, most school students especially, they really like to see things in person, like the real physical object, and that's more exciting to them to be able to control it, to actually see it. And so we've really kind of made it more hands-on for students.
And do you have any corporate workshop? Let's say Perkins, his company, want to come. Do you have something for the adults?
To be honest, the adults and kids get the same workshop, and this sounds. I mean, between you and me, the adults and kids aren't very different, especially when they're engaging with these kind of concepts, right? Because I think that this area for the most part is quite new to people, right? It's more about engaging curiosity in the right direction. And for corporates, I think the only difference is we eventually tie it back to their actual deliverables in their work, right? And so in fact, one of the things we've been doing is we partnered recently with Razer. You can see this boat on the left, right? It's Razer is a gaming company out of Singapore, and they are very good at design. So they're like a gaming company. They make these very cool looking designs. And so we said, okay, you know what? You guys are good at design, right? How can your design help create environmental impact? And you don't need to create the AI in the boat. Like, we're good at that, right? And so in this partnership, they actually helped us design the outside of the boat. And so with corporates, it's not I mean, it depends on the corporate. In an ideal world, we actually engage them much deeper than just a small workshop, right? We actually engage their core value as a company, and then we tie what they're really good at to what really creates an impact with us, right? A good example, and Perkins is going to laugh because I'm talking about his competitor, is we did a project with Microsoft Azure, right? Which is the community, this one, right? So basically, much like AWS, Azure has some really interesting machine learning resources, right? So they have you can actually set up your machine learning on their cloud and do some processing work. And so we said, okay, you know what, you guys are really good at providing cloud services, so we'll do a workshop for your team, but also you're going to go out, you're going to take pictures of trash on the beach, and you're going to use your own product, Azure, to actually create the machine learning model, and you're going to see how it improves the actual performance on the boat. And I think for us it's two-sided, right? One is to, of course, teach people about SDGs, teach people about AI and the environment, but also show them how what they're doing or their skill set in whatever work they're doing is actually directly applicable to whatever we are doing, which is a very sort of impact focus, right? Because for the most part, where we see the challenges, people are not able to make that connection between what they're doing and how they can create some real impact outside their job or outside, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to create through the workshop.
What do you think, Perkins? Putting you on the spotlight.
No, I think this is a great thing that Sidhant is doing. But actually, I have one question is, so it looks like you're in the right direction. So what do you think is needed to scale your operation, scale your impact?
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna unpopular opinion probably, but so as I said, in our my view is very like capitalist in this sense, right? So my view is that okay, if you look at all these startups, right, they're basically getting insane amount of capital resources to create massive impact, right? Whether it's Uber or Airbnb, that is real impact. Bottom line, it affects your life and my life. So that's how I see it, and I actually believe that we should be the world's first kind of billion-dollar sustainability company, right? So actually, we are looking at very traditional VC-based capital to grow our impact. So we are at about 7 boats right now, right? So we have 3 in Hong Kong, 2 more coming in, one in India, one in Panama. There are 7 boats right now. And we are actually starting to try and scale this up. So I've got a factory in India that now produces the boats. We're scaling up use cases so that, and so the story is from an impact angle, you're cutting down carbon emissions every time you sell a boat because you're replacing one of these old diesel boats or gasoline boats. And we are now trying to get from 7 boats to 30 boats within this next 18 months. And actually, Benita mentioned this earlier. We are part of Jumpstarter, which is one of the startup competitions of Alibaba globally, and when one of the top 10 startups in the world, in their view, at least in this competition, right? So our approach actually is a very traditional business approach. What we're saying is we're going to clients, we're making their machine cheaper, we're making their machine easier to use, we're making their machine, so we're cutting your fuel cost, your manpower cost. And so for a lot of the clients, it's not a very beautiful green impact story. They're actually buying us simply because we save them money. But if you look at the big picture, it is actually creating a real impact. And so in terms of scaling up, we are basically going hardcore. Like if there is a boat in the water, we're going to replace that with one of our machines in the next 10 years. That's it, right? So that's kind of where we're going. And also we're going to be building now bigger boats and smaller boats, right? So we're going for cargo, for example, we're going to be building bigger boats so that we can move more cargo, collect more waste. And then we're building smaller boats for like more specialized use cases like oil spill or water quality data collection or inspections for the government. So that's kind of the view.
I see.
Any question from team, Francis, Anna?
Hello, this is Anna. Hi.
Hi.
Very, very impressive presentation. I think your presentation worth more people to know, because I haven't, before this presentation, I haven't heard about your project, but I'm sure this is worth more like people who know and publicize the whole thing. At least one thing you can do is publicize your workshop to the kids. Those kids will definitely like to go and have a look at your fun stuff. Yeah.
So Anna is a parent, I know. So Anna would know from a mom's perspective.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, like, do you have like a YouTube channel or maybe YouTube source that you can like try to promote your work more? Like people can actually watch your clips like online, just to get a feel, like have a clear idea what this means. Yeah, what the AI thinks. Yeah.
Actually, that's a really great suggestion. At the moment, we have an Instagram, which is our most maintained account. But we are now we also have a YouTube. It's just there's not a lot of videos up there, but maybe that's something we should start focusing on. And actually, more and more we are trying. Actually, literally from this month, we are starting this new sort of campaign where we are building stories around our clients, right? So around how they actually used our product and how we were not only able to save them time and money, but how we were able to create a real impact, right, in their local environment. I mean, even just today, we at Sino Group, actually, we had a boat delivered in Gold Coast Marina today, and they were using their old boat in front of us. And when that boat comes to park, it's like engine is just creating so much smoke in that area, right? And then later in the day, they started using our machine, and the marina operator was literally like, he was like, wow, like this is quiet, there's no noise, it's so clean. So for us now, the next day is actually creating stories around the real sort of environmental impact and the real clients that we've helped. And I think that kind of ties into your suggestion as well of creating some YouTube channel, some content, you know.
So we'll be putting today's presentation on our YouTube and Compass, but I'll sure share the recording with Sidhant as well. Definitely, as Anna said, I think more people should know about this this work and its impact. And yeah, thank you, Sidhant. And anybody else? So I think Sidhant, his workshop and the boat is probably after April, maybe a little bit better. So if anybody want to arrange like a company visit or learn more about the project or I don't know, for them in Jumpstarter, let Sidhant know. I will be sending out the recording and the presentation after today. So we'll do a little bit of editing and we'll put it online. So thanks everybody for joining. I know it's late at night. Have a wonderful evening and a great rest of the week.
Okay, thank you, Benita.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Benita.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.